The river surged wildly beneath the afternoon sun, swelling beyond its banks with frightening speed as Katherine Eaton clutched her 4-year-old son Henry to her chest, desperately searching for higher ground. She had only stopped to wash some clothing by the riverbank, but the spring melt had come early to Nebraska Territory in 1857, turning the normally placid stream into a raging torrent within minutes. "Mama, I'm scared," Henry cried, his small arms tightening around her neck as the water rushed around her knees, then quickly rose to her thighs. "Hold tight, sweetheart," Katherine said, fighting to keep her footing on the slippery riverbed. The basket of laundry had long since been swept away, but Katherine couldn't spare it a thought as she struggled toward the bank. Her late husband's homestead lay just beyond the tree line, but it might as well have been 100 miles away as the rushing water pulled at her skirts. Katherine was about to attempt another step when her foot slipped on a submerged rock. She staggered, nearly going under, only just managing to keep Henry above the water as she regained her balance. "Help!" she screamed, her voice barely audible over the roar of the river. "Somebody help us." As if summoned by her desperate plea, a rider appeared on the ridge above them. Through the spray of water, Katherine could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered against the sky. Without hesitation, he urged his horse down the steep embankment toward the flooded riverbank. Zachary Warren had been tracking a stray calf when he heard the woman's cry. He'd been working cattle in this part of the Nebraska Territory for nearly 2 years, hired on as foreman at the Tanner Ranch after leaving behind a troubled past in Missouri. He'd seen firsthand what spring floods could do, how quickly they could turn deadly. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Buck, waded into the rising water without hesitation, responding to the sure hands of his rider. Zachary's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation: a woman and child, maybe moments from being swept away by the current. "Hold on." He called out, guiding Buck deeper into the flood. Katherine had never been so relieved to see another human being. The cowboy's face was partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but his movements were confident as he maneuvered his horse through the churning water. When he reached them, the cowboy lifted mother and child onto his saddle without a word, settling Katherine sideways in front of him while she clutched Henry to her chest. His arm came around her waist, steady and strong, as he turned his horse back toward shore. "Thank you," Katherine gasped, shivering from cold and fear. "The river rose so fast I didn't think." "Save your breath, madam," the cowboy replied, his voice low and steady. "Let's get you both to dry ground first." The journey back to shore seemed to take an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two. The horse struggled against the current, but the cowboy guided him expertly, finding the safest path to the bank. When they finally reached solid ground, Katherine felt dizzy with relief. The cowboy dismounted first, then reached up to help Katherine and Henry down. His hands were calloused but gentle as he lifted them from the saddle. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes a startling shade of green scanning her for injuries. "No, just shaken," Katherine replied, setting Henry down beside her. She pushed her sodden hair back from her face. "I'm Katherine Eaton. This is my son Henry. We live just over that rise." "Zachary Warren," he replied with a slight tip of his hat, "foreman at the Tanner place." He knelt down to Henry's level. "You all right, little man?" Henry nodded shyly, pressing closer to his mother's skirts. "Our home isn't far," Katherine said. "Just follow that path through the trees. I'd be grateful if you'd escort us. I'm not sure my legs are steady enough for the walk just yet." Zachary hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, madam." He helped them both back onto his horse, then led Buck by the reins up the path toward the Eaton homestead. Katherine couldn't help but notice the way his shoulders moved beneath his damp shirt, or how his hat sat at a slight angle on his dark hair. There was something about him, something in the way he carried himself that spoke of both strength and caution. The Eaton place came into view as they crested the hill, a modest cabin with a small barn and vegetable garden. It wasn't much, but Katherine had worked hard to maintain it since Thomas had passed away the previous winter, taken by pneumonia during a bitter cold spell. "It's not much," Katherine said, almost apologetically, "but it's home." Zachary helped them down from the horse once more. "Looks like a fine place, Mrs. Eaton. Please call me Katherine." Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that surprised them both. "You and the boy should get into dry clothes," Zachary said, looking away first. "That water was cold. Don't want either of you taking sick. Won't you come in? I can make coffee and you should dry off as well." Zachary glanced down at his wet clothes, then back at the river in the distance. "I suppose that calf I was tracking will have to wait." Inside the cabin, Katherine quickly changed Henry into dry clothes and settled him near the fireplace with a blanket and a wooden toy horse, then excused herself to change her own sodden dress. When she returned, she found Zachary standing awkwardly by the door, as if unsure of his welcome. "Please sit," she offered, gesturing to one of the chairs at the small table. "I'll put that coffee on now." As she busied herself with the stove, she was acutely aware of his presence. It had been months since a man other than occasional neighbors had been in her home. She snuck glances at him as she worked, noting his strong profile, the careful way he removed his hat and placed it on his knee. "You live out here alone, just you and the boy?" Zachary asked, breaking the silence. Katherine nodded. "Since my husband passed last winter. Thomas and I came out here from Ohio 4 years ago, just after Henry was born. He had dreams of building something lasting." She paused, swallowing past the familiar ache in her throat. "Now I'm just trying to hold on to what he started. That can't be easy." "No, but we manage." The coffee began to boil, and Katherine poured 2 cups, setting one before Zachary. Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and she pulled back quickly, surprised by the warmth that rushed through her at the brief contact. "You said you work for the Tanners?" she asked, taking a seat across from him. "Going on 2 years now, cattle operation about 5 miles east of here." "I know of it. Mr. Tanner comes to Council Bluffs sometimes for supplies, same as we do." Zachary nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Good man to work for, fair." Katherine studied him over the rim of her cup. There was a guardedness about him, a careful control in his words and movements that suggested he was a man who kept much to himself. Yet there was kindness there too. She had seen it in the way he'd spoken to Henry, in how gently he'd handled them both during the rescue. "What about you, Mr. Warren? Do you have family nearby?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, madam, no family to speak of." Before Katherine could respond, Henry came over from his place by the fire and tugged at Zachary's sleeve. "Mister, did your horse get a name?" Zachary's serious expression softened. "His name's Buck." "Can I see him again, Henry?" Katherine admonished gently. "Mr. Warren will need to be on his way soon." "It's all right," Zachary said, surprising her. "We can take a quick look before I head out, if that's okay with your ma." Henry looked at her with pleading eyes, and Katherine nodded her permission. The 3 of them stepped outside, where Buck was contentedly grazing on the sparse spring grass near the cabin. "He's a good horse," Zachary explained as Henry cautiously approached the animal. "Steady, not easily spooked." He guided the boy's small hand to Buck's neck, showing him how to stroke the horse properly. Katherine watched them, a strange feeling stirring in her chest. Thomas had been a good father, but he'd been so focused on building their homestead that he'd sometimes had little time for such moments with Henry. Seeing her son's face light up as he petted the horse with Zachary's guidance made her both happy and sad all at once. When it was time for Zachary to leave, Katherine found herself reluctant to see him go. "Thank you again," she said. "If you hadn't come along when you did." "No need to think on that," Zachary replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Just glad I was passing by." He mounted Buck with fluid ease, then paused, looking down at her. "That river's going to be dangerous for a while yet. Spring melt's just beginning." "We'll be careful," she promised. He nodded, then tipped his hat. "Madam, young sir." Henry waved enthusiastically as Zachary rode away. Katherine stood watching until horse and rider disappeared over the rise, a curious emptiness settling over her as they vanished from sight. 3 days later, Katherine was startled by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the cabin. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron to find Zachary Warren dismounting from Buck. "Mr. Warren," she greeted him, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Is everything all right?" Zachary removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Yes, madam. I was just passing by and thought I'd check to make sure you and the boy were doing all right after that scare in the river. It wasn't entirely true. The Eaton place wasn't on the way to anywhere Zachary needed to be, but he'd found himself thinking about the widow and her son over the past days. Something about Catherine's quiet strength and the vulnerability beneath it had stayed with him. That's very kind of you, Katherine replied. We're fine. Henry's been talking about you and Buck non-stop since you left. As if summoned by his name, Henry appeared in the doorway, his face lighting up when he spotted their visitor. Mr. Warren, did you bring Buck? Zachary smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually solemn face. I sure did. He's right over there. Can I pet him again? Katherine nodded her permission, and Henry dashed over to where the horse was tethered. Careful, Henry. Remember what Mr. Warren showed you. I remember, Mama. Katherine turned back to Zachary. Would you like to come in? I was just about to prepare dinner. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Unless you need to get back to the ranch, I have some time, Zachary said, surprising himself with how quickly he accepted the invitation. Inside the cabin, Katherine moved about the small kitchen area, preparing a simple meal of beans, corn bread, and the last of her smoked venison from the previous fall's hunting. Zachary offered to help, and she set him to cutting vegetables while Henry chattered away, asking dozens of questions about horses and cattle and life on the Tanner Ranch. Zachary answered each question patiently, occasionally glancing at Katherine as she worked. She was pretty in a natural, unassuming way, honey-brown hair pulled back from her face, clear blue eyes that crinkled slightly when she smiled. Her movements were efficient and graceful, speaking of a woman accustomed to hard work. As they ate, Katherine asked about the Tanner Ranch and the work Zachary did there. Mr. Tanner's building up a decent herd, Zachary explained. Nothing too large yet, but he's got plans. Good grazing land, plenty of water access. We've got about 10 hands working there now, more when it's time for the big drives. And you're the foreman, Katherine asked. That's quite a responsibility for someone so young. Zachary shrugged. I'm 28, been working with cattle since I was 15. He didn't mention his years before that, the orphanage in St. Louis after his parents died of cholera, the hard lessons learned on the streets after he ran away at 13. Mr. Tanner took a chance on me. Their conversation flowed easily through dinner, and afterward, Katherine put Henry to bed despite his protests that he wanted to stay up with their visitor. When she returned to the main room, she found Zachary standing by the window, looking out at the darkening land. It's getting late, she said softly. You're welcome to stay the night if you'd rather not ride back in the dark. We have a small room off the barn where Thomas used to let travelers stay. Zachary turned to face her. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. It seems the least I can offer after what you did for us. After a moment's consideration, Zachary nodded. Thank you, that's very kind. As Katherine showed him to the small room attached to the barn, she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and comfort in his presence. It had been so long since she'd had adult company, especially male company, and she found herself lingering, reluctant to bid him good night. Is there anything else you need? She asked, standing in the doorway of the simple room with its narrow bed and small table. No, this is fine. More than fine. Zachary paused, then added, I noticed some of your fence is down on the west side. Katherine sighed. Yes, winter was hard on it. I haven't had the chance to repair it yet. I could take a look at it before I leave tomorrow if you'd like. She hesitated, not wanting to take advantage of his kindness. You've already done so much. It's no trouble, he assured her. Least I can do. Then thank you, I'd appreciate that. In the morning, Katherine woke early as usual and was surprised to find Zachary already up, feeding the few chickens she kept and checking on her 2 milk cows. You didn't have to do that, she said, stepping out into the cool morning air with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Zachary straightened, offering a small smile. Force of habit, I'm used to early mornings. After a quick breakfast, Zachary spent several hours repairing the broken fence line while Katherine worked in her vegetable garden, with Henry alternating between helping Zachary and bringing him cups of water that Katherine suspected were mostly an excuse for the boy to pepper him with more questions. By midday, the fence was mended and Zachary prepared to leave. As he saddled Buck, Katherine approached with a small package wrapped in cloth. "Some cornbread for your ride," she said, handing it to him. "It's not much, but it's more than enough," he interrupted gently, tucking the package into his saddlebag. "Thank you." There was a moment of awkward silence between them, both sensing that something unspoken hung in the air. "Well," Katherine finally said, "safe travels, Mr. Warren." "Zachary," he corrected, "and perhaps I could stop by again sometime to check on the fence, make sure it's holding." Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Yes, I'd like that. I mean, we'd like that. Henry would be delighted." "Just Henry?" Zachary asked, a rare teasing note in his voice. Her blush deepened. "No, not just Henry." He mounted Buck with a nod, his expression serious once more but with a new warmth in his eyes. "I'll see you soon, Katherine." Over the following weeks, Zachary found reasons to visit the Eaton homestead whenever he could spare time away from the Tanner ranch. Sometimes he brought small gifts, a jar of honey from one of the ranch hands who kept bees, a new wooden toy for Henry that he'd carved himself, seeds for Katherine's garden that Mr. Tanner's wife had sent along. Each visit, he would help with some task around the property, repairing the roof, reinforcing the chicken coop, helping Katherine plant her garden. And each time, the three of them would share a meal afterward, Henry chattering excitedly while Katherine and Zachary exchanged glances that grew increasingly warm. Katherine found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both excited and frightened her. It had been only a year since Thomas's death, and she hadn't expected to feel this way about another man so soon or perhaps ever again. Yet, there was something about Zachary Warren that called to her. It wasn't just his handsome features or the way he was so patient with Henry. It was the quiet strength in him, the integrity she sensed beneath his reserved exterior. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught a glimpse of loneliness in his eyes that mirrored her own. One evening in late May, after Henry had been put to bed, Katherine and Zachary sat on the small bench outside her cabin, watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I never get tired of that view," Katherine said softly. "It's beautiful," Zachary agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking not at the sky but at her. She ducked her head, suddenly shy under his gaze. "Zachary." "Katherine," he said, his voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Her heart stuttered at his serious tone. "What is it?" He was quiet for a long moment, as if gathering his courage. "Before I came to work for the Tanners, I wasn't always the man I am now." "What do you mean?" Zachary sighed, looking back at the sunset. "After my parents died, I was on my own from a young age. Made some bad choices. Ran with a rough crowd in Missouri for a while. I never killed anyone," he added quickly, "but I was involved in things I'm not proud of. Theft, mostly. A couple of brawls that got out of hand." Katherine listened without interrupting, sensing how difficult this confession was for him. "I decided to leave that life behind, came out to Nebraska Territory to start fresh. Mr. Tanner gave me a chance when most wouldn't, but I wanted you to know the truth about me before." He trailed off. "Before what?" Katherine prompted gently. Zachary turned to face her fully. "Before I tell you that I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Eaton, with you and that boy of yours." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. Part of her had known this was coming, had hoped for it even, but hearing the words aloud still left her stunned. "I know it's too soon after your husband," Zachary continued when she didn't immediately respond. "And I know a man with my past probably has no right to even think about a woman like you, but I wanted to be honest." Katherine reached out slowly and took his hand in hers. "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with your past." She took a deep breath. "As for it being too soon. Thomas would want Henry and me to be happy, and when you're here, Zachary, we are happy. I am happy." Zachary's fingers tightened around hers. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it scares me half to death." He lifted his free hand to gently touch her cheek. "What are you afraid of? Losing someone again, depending on someone again, being vulnerable." She leaned slightly into his touch. "Henry adores you already, if things didn't work between us." "I understand fear," Zachary said softly. I've spent most of my life afraid of letting anyone get close enough to see who I really am. But you and Henry, you make me want to be brave." In the fading light, he leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Katherine closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a tentative, gentle kiss. His hand moved to cradle the back of her head, and for a moment, everything else faded away: the homestead, the challenges of frontier life, the ghosts of the past. There was only this moment, this man, this new beginning that neither had expected to find. When they finally separated, Katherine rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" "Now," Zachary said with a small smile, "we take each day as it comes. No rush, no pressure. We figure this out together." The spring rains continued, turning the prairie into a carpet of wildflowers as May gave way to June. Zachary's visits became more frequent, and the bond between him, Katherine, and Henry grew stronger with each passing week. One Sunday afternoon, Zachary arrived with a surprise: a beautiful chestnut mare. "She's gentle," he explained as Henry bounced excitedly around the horse. "Mr. Tanner's been wanting to thin out the herd a bit, focus on the stronger bloodlines. When I mentioned you could use a good riding horse, he offered her at a fair price." He hesitated. "I hope you don't mind that I went ahead and brought her. I can take her back if she's beautiful," Katherine interrupted, stroking the mare's sleek neck. "But Zachary, I can't afford—" "It's already settled," he said. "Consider it a gift." "That's too much." "I can't accept, Katherine," Zachary said firmly. "You need a good horse out here, for practicality if nothing else." And he added with a slight smile, "Now you and Henry can ride into Council Bluffs more easily, or come visit me at the Tanner place sometime." The idea of visiting him at his work, of seeing that part of his life, made Katherine smile. "Well, when you put it that way, what's her name?" "She doesn't have one yet. I thought you and Henry might want to name her." Henry, who had been listening to the exchange with wide eyes, immediately piped up. "Can we call her Star? She has a white spot on her forehead like a star." Katherine laughed. "Star it is, then." Later, after Zachary had shown Henry how to feed and brush the mare and the boy had finally worn himself out with excitement, Katherine and Zachary walked hand in hand along the edge of her property. "You're spoiling us," she said softly. Zachary squeezed her hand. "You deserve to be spoiled a little." They stopped by a cluster of cottonwood trees, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. Zachary turned to face her, his expression more serious than usual. "Katherine, there's something I want to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat. "Yes." "Mr. Tanner's offered me a partnership in the ranch." That wasn't what she'd been expecting. "Zachary, that's wonderful," he nodded. "It is. He has no sons, just daughters who are all married and living back east. He's been grooming me to take over more responsibility for a while now, but I didn't expect this so soon." "You deserve it," Katherine said warmly. "You've worked hard." "It would mean I'd have a real stake in something," Zachary continued. "Security, a future." He took both her hands in his. "A future I'd like to share with you and Henry, if you'll have me." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'll marry me, Katherine Eaton." Zachary's green eyes were earnest as they held hers. "I know it hasn't been long, and if you need more time, I understand, but I love you, I love Henry, and I want to build a life with you both." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes. "What about the homestead? Thomas and I put everything we had into this place." "We could keep it," Zachary offered. "Use it as a second property, maybe expand it someday, or sell it if you prefer. The choice would be yours, ours to make together." Katherine looked around at the small homestead that had been her home for 4 years. It held memories both painful and precious, but it wasn't the land that made a home, it was the people you shared it with. "Yes," she said, turning back to Zachary with a radiant smile. "Yes, I'll marry you." Zachary gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his joy. When he set her down again, he kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and promise into the embrace. "When?" he asked when they finally separated, both a little breathless. "Soon," Katherine replied, "before summer's end." They were married in late July in Council Bluffs, a simple ceremony with Mr. and Mrs. Tanner as witnesses and Henry proudly serving as ring bearer. Katherine wore a new blue dress that Mrs. Tanner had helped her sew, and Zachary looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a borrowed suit coat. After the ceremony, They spent one night in the town's small hotel, their first night together as husband and wife, shy and tender in their discovery of each other, before returning to the Tanner Ranch the following day. Mr. Tanner had gifted them a cabin on the property, freshly built and waiting for their arrival. "Welcome home, Mrs. Warren," Zachary said as he carried Katherine across the threshold, Henry running ahead to explore every corner of their new dwelling. "Home," Katherine repeated softly, wrapping her arms around her new husband's neck. "Yes, this feels like home already." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The partnership with Mr. Tanner flourished, and after the older man passed away in 1862, Zachary and Katherine took over full ownership of the ranch, expanding it into one of the most successful operations in the Nebraska Territory. Henry grew from a curious boy into a capable young man with his stepfather's love of horses and his mother's gentle heart. And in the spring of 1859, the family welcomed a new addition, a son they named Thomas Zachary Warren, followed 2 years later by a daughter, Emma Rose. Sometimes, especially on spring evenings when the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, Katherine and Zachary would sit on the porch of their home, watching their children play as the sun set over the land they had come to love. "Do you ever think about that day by the river?" Katherine would ask, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. "How different our lives might have been if you hadn't ridden by when you did." Zachary would pull her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think maybe some things are meant to be," he'd reply. "That river rose too fast, and I found the two people who would change my life forever." And Katherine would smile, remembering that desperate day when a quiet cowboy had lifted a mother and child onto his saddle without a word, never knowing that simple act of kindness would be the beginning of a love that would sustain them all through whatever floods or droughts life might bring their way.